Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Forever Night Extreme Studios in the Pine Hills Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. Um, we have some storms going on here in Central Florida. We're having some electrical issues there. The young 20-something Professor Pixel, who is the only person on the planet that's watched all 1,225 episodes of the original Dark Shadows, would be joining me for tonight for our Extreme TV new episode list. And tonight we're going to be doing season 1, our review episode by episode of Forever Night. The campy vampire TV show that started off, I believe, on CBS late night and then turned into sci-fi or who the hell knows. But it's one of those little things you remember from the 90s, and we're trying to revisit it because, you know what? We love Twin Peaks. We've covered all the episodes from all the seasons and the movies, and we've done a lot of season 1s here on the Extreme Movie Show too, from the TV perspective. And so this is something that he, as a young 20-something millennial, Gen Z, or whatever the hell you call it, wanted to review because it's full of camp. And frankly, after the first 2 episodes, I'm starting to get hooked. I want to thank everybody that was here in channel for our launch here tonight, 6:15. Heard from a few new people today on Twitter about it. First things first about Forever Night. We'll give the setup and we'll start diving into the 2 episodes. So the guy that we're going to be talking about here, it's Canadian. It's a Canadian show. So we always wonder with television, are they going to do things differently because it's Canadian? You know, we always talk about how TV shows like the X-Files got super popular in the 90s, how it moved from, say, Vancouver to LA, or a lot of shows will go up to Vancouver to film because they're just frankly cheaper to do. And you can get more bang for your buck there. So young fledgling TV shows like 21 Jump Street on Fox, which is a younger television station in the 80s going 90s, would film up there, and a lot of other ones would too. Millennium, my personal favorite between that and X-Files, would also be shot up there. So you have a little bit of this kind of moody 90s vibe thing with it, and it's the one thing that I really love about the shows. As we've talked about here on the Extreme Movie Show, as an 80s based channel, being an 80s kid myself, we've talked about how movies have changed, particularly action movies, and just in general around 85, 86. Here we're talking 1992, and things have definitely changed over in pop culture with movies and music and whatnot. I think both of you have lived through it would recognize just some key themes too. There's the lack of just general fun and optimism that the 80s seem to have, and the whole positive American attitude that you would see in movies, and just basically giving people a good ending. And I think that in the 90s, everything became glum. You think of music kind of going from hair metal bands to 2-3 chord emo bands like Nirvana. Nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of how it is. Everybody wearing, black, everybody looking like they're from Seattle, because that was the scene. And not only did Heart come from there, you had singers that were just incredible, like coming from Queensryche there. Just everything was Seattle based, it seems like, in the 90s. And Nick Knight here, what I thought was interesting about this is it has that same kind of moody vibe to it, but it's in Toronto, the mean streets of Toronto, which is the other side of Canada. So obviously different cultures even in Canada. What's great about this show from the first episodes is this. First of all, we got a guy that has an incredible, nearly adult level pornographic name, Nick Knight. I mean, the alliteration, whatever you want to call it, phenomenal. The guy who plays him, he's playing it totally different, and I think that's the key to the series, at least from what I'm guessing so far, because I've only seen a handful of episodes over the years. The young 20-something Professor Pixel's taking care of his technical issues. Are you there, Pixel? He's having some audio issues. We'll be clicking in here in a minute. The thing with Nick Knight, as I like to say it, is instead of playing vampires as a sexy feral animal type, larger than life, like from the 70s and 80s, we're now going into where vampires were now 150 pounds soaking wet, emo, soy boy types or whatever, like say from the Vampire Lestat and such, going all the way to the current times. So we don't have these large manly personas that are seductive and erotic or creatures. They're just very sensitive individuals. And so that's the kind of guy that we get here, because as we see in the introduction here, which is absolutely beautiful music, you have Nick Knight basically wanting to be, you know what, I'm 800 years old, I just want to become mortal again, live, and damn it, I'm so sympathetic to everybody. The thing I appreciate about it is it's a complete different twist that you would have on vampirism. Now, you may not think it's sexy, despite the fact he's collared up with the leather jacket and rocking the turtlenecks in this episode, which I think is a great fashion choice. I think he does a very good job on it, but it is a completely different perspective. And I have to say this about Forever Night. They were there before the Anne Rice books were turned into to movies, and then later on TV shows and all that. So you could argue that Nick Knight was very successful in setting the tone for what would come. So before we get into those first 2 episodes in here, Pixel, are you now available?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so I was just going over the setup for the Nick Knight show here that we're talking about here, the wonderful name for it, and everything about how vampires are going to be looked at differently now, how it's being portrayed. A first watch for me. I believe this is a first watch for you, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I found out about it whenever we were going ahead making our list to decide season ones, and I was like, "Wow, this is interesting."
Well, I did put over the fact that the only show we've covered more than one season of was every episode of Twin Peaks because we just think that's tremendous. But the one thing I definitely wanted to bring up that I think people will compare this to is the fact that we've got tons of fog machine, gothic music, and candles in these episodes. It reminds me a little bit of Dark Shadows of the Revival, which was a hell of a lot of fun. We even had the actress who plays Josette pop up on our Twitter feeds a little bit too. It was a fun ride, and this almost has those kind of vibes to it. So, being a first watch for you, not aware of the fact you weren't even born at this time this TV show was gone, for the first two episodes, they're kind of like a reshoot of the pilot, which I believe had Rick Springfield on it. We chose to skip that right now and dive right into the first two episodes for that. What's your initial take on these two?
My initial take, I had a lot of fun with it. That's what I'm going to go with because there's a good bit of camp, and there's interesting setup, especially with the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
But with how the second episode ends, I'm a little skeptical. It's a lot like because we reviewed the first season of Buffy on here. It's a lot like if that pilot episode of Buffy was good,
Right.
without a master, but still. I guess we should go ahead and dive right into our introduction, though.
Let's do it.
So we get a small flashback that features our dear Nick Knight, as he is 800 years in the past and he's being initiated. And as this is about to happen, and you are an immortal now. It goes ahead. He's about to feast, and then they cut back to the present. He's a detective. He works at night exclusively, and so somehow this hasn't caused any real issues until there's suddenly cases going around of people disappearing and, well, not disappearing, dying with their blood drained. And at first our conclusion is to think vampires, but it's done with a blade all around the neck. And from there is also a museum that's introduced pretty soon after that. We see a guard, he's watching the place, and there's this cup that he's in front of, and suddenly something swoops in and he screams, and that's where we're left with in the beginning.
I would argue that in the 80s to 90s, this would be considered mid, meaning it's not A grade with the time slots and the budget. Doesn't matter. I think it's very solid. I've always said that it's hard, I think, sometimes to get involved into a movie or a TV show if you can't relate to somebody and where we're pivoting from. Obviously, here they're playing the long game with introducing several storylines here at the beginning. This 800 year ago transformation and how it affects modern times, plus whatever detective element today that fits his thing. Yeah, it sounds stupid. Oh my God, he's a vampire, so he has to work the night shift. Well, you know what? We had talked about Kolchak, the Night Stalker from the early 70s, that show that was incredible. And that was a lot of fun doing it with like a Monster of the Week type thing and some phenomenal performances. And it didn't last. I mean, that's just as much as the occult and paranormal stuff started to appear really crazily in the 70s on television and movies. Think of James Bond there with the occult there and Live and Let Die. There's always a market for it. It's just, is it producible? And I think you can either hit a home run by having something that lasts a couple of seasons like this show obviously has, or everyone's gonna be like, man, remember that cult classic that just didn't last? Or I wish I could see it again. There's some great season ones out there that just don't get a big enough audience. This was made for late night, so it's the perfect spot for it. I think this is a show that, at least for the 2 episodes, can appeal to both. But the thing that I think grabs me too with the whole initiation, this is going to be a love triangle, because you got this guy who looks like he's 110 pounds soaking wet, and he talks like one of those, emo goth guys from, high school acting class or whatever. But he's actually not bad in these 2 episodes, despite his physical look. I think the opening with the Toronto skyline, the sky needle there, or whatever it is, there with the sun, because it's so far north that the sun doesn't get too high, I think it really sucks you in. I think it's a very undervalued opening, because the music is just the highest part to it. Him just over-exaggerating the whole gothic, he was born in 1228, but he wants to be human. It's phenomenal. It's a bit campy, and you have to watch how close you dance to that, because you can go overboard. And I think this is just dancing great on it. So a lot of it's going to depend on the actor, right? Not the love interests or the storylines. We don't give a shit, right? It can help, right? But this guy nails it. He talks like this a lot. And you can tell he's so sympathetic that everybody else's feelings matter, damn it. And don't you just understand it? And damn it, you just have to understand that I feel very strongly about things. I love it. It's phenomenal. The graphics don't have to be great. We know it's a low budget, but it works. What they make up for lack of a budget, they make up for in special effects here, with just the set pieces and everything too. And from the opening scene of him walking in with a smirk on his face, you have to nail this, I think. Otherwise, in a few minutes, people are like, oh, this is bullshit and stupid. I'm turning it off. It's a dumb vampire. But he's kind of cocky and arrogant, and he tells all the reporters in his face, particularly this one, to go home. And you can tell, hey, not only are we introducing a character here 2 different ways really quick within a few minutes, you're basically seeing, okay, what are the rules of engagement we're going to have to follow that are presented in this universe with him? Meaning, is the sunlight going to kill him? Is steaks and garlic and all that shit going to affect him? Because different vampires from different region are affected by different things. They've only been magnified over the years once they got into other stories and television. So I think here this is kind of a neat thing to do it, and we get the setup in them. I mean, I think it's a pretty simple, basic entry-level thing too. Some interesting camera angles and whatnot too. But I'm not turned off by the opening gambit or the storylines. What about you?
No, I'm not turned off either. Lucian LaCroix is the name of his Nick Knight's master.
Pretty much. Do you like the horrible French accents they have? Because even though some of them may have French in their background as an actor, to me this looks really horrible.
Well, they are in Canada, so I imagine they have some history with France.
They do, and it's the eastern side, so Toronto has definitely a bit of it. Yeah, not Ottawa, of course, but still.
It was definitely a choice, but I think they realized like a few minutes after, you know what, this is kind of not great. Let's go ahead and start, speaking English like normal, because that's what we all can speak.
So there's this break-in at night where somebody dies, and we're starting to see this convergence of some bums that he's friendly to and buys them fast food. At first I thought, oh, that's kind of pedo-ish of him, but I figured, oh, maybe they're like his street level contacts. But I can't tell, because he's just such a damn swell, nice guy who just feels very strongly in here, and he's very moody when he talks. But you can tell every single woman in here wants the D, if you know what I'm saying, or the big N. I don't know what you want to call it. But obviously when he goes to get the body looked at by the medical examiner, we can already tell that not only she's interested in him, and despite the fact there's 2 marks on the dude's neck, she's basically trying to help him become normal. So we get that early on. It's not like this is an angle that they're going to generate. We get this as a setup. I like it. I like how they're giving us 3 basically very clear things here, and a lot of transitions with the nighttime of Toronto and a simple detective story. The only issue I have is the guy that's like his boss or like that. He reminds me of the Hawaiian boss on Kolchak the Night Stalker, except this guy's like not even a stand-in. He's horrible. It sounds like he's reading his lines and trying to maybe yell at him. The timing just doesn't work, and that's the thing that really stands out to me is Nick Knight has tremendous timing with everybody he's on screen with, except this one guy. He's got the dopey hat, and I'm like, I'm getting just really, really bad Kolchak vibes from it, and I don't mean that in a good way. It's the only negative thing about this episode. It's like, get this guy off my screen. He's changed the channel kind of heat. What do you think?
So the chief of police here, the not chief of police, the sergeant, he is actually in another show that we've reviewed here before on the Extreme Movie Show, and that's Resident Alien.
Oh, him.
He's Dan. Yeah.
I didn't think he was good enough to land another job, but there you go.
Yeah, here he's I was kind of just distracted by that, so I didn't even notice how rough it was. But you're absolutely right. He can't yell at him. He's like, "Oh well, I have no way of being intimidating." But he you kind of get the vibe that he's also a swell kind of guy because he can't be intimidating. Which I don't know how that goes.
He's not a sissy boy. He's a sympathy boy.
But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, though. His boss goes ahead and says that, okay, well, with the break-in at the museum, another person losing blood, this case can't stop with the break of day. So Nick is going to have a partner now. A partner that can continue doing the job when he has to stay away from the sun because he's allergic. And that's when we're introduced to Schanke.
I don't mind this guy right now, but
Okay.
I could turn on him in an instant. But he does do a good job, especially in the second episode, because this basically is the 2 episodes is basically a run on, so it's basically a reshoot of the pilot. He's just sort of there because he kind of has to be, and we know that. So he's got a tough position as an actor to be in, but somehow he's not offensive.
Really? Here's the thing. He's
mildly annoying, perhaps.
The thing is that as soon as he's introduced and you get to see Nick's reaction, he's like, "Oh God, somebody shoot me, please!" That's great. But yeah, no. Then after that, we get to see him drop off food to the homeless. For some reason, I was wondering what the deal is here too, but I think it's literally just he cares about the homeless population. I don't know.
It's very progressive if you think about it, which, as I mentioned right when you were logging in here, I've got some thunderstorms of lightning going on here at the Pine Hills Palace myself. My dogs are a little scared. It's actually pretty intense, which is actually the perfect setting for an episode of Forever Night. It's something that we're going, my radar's up. Maybe this guy's going to suck. Maybe not. But the thing about it is we've always said kind of here on Extreme Movie Show that sometimes Westerns actually can be the best type of storytelling situation because it's classic storytelling, good versus evil in some form or another, maybe kind of basic. Cop procedurals, and by procedurals, I don't mean like all the stuff that's really expensive, like the law ones and the street ones, but I'm talking ones like this where detective things are kind of like it too, because there's a mystery involved, and everybody loves the unwinding of a mystery. There's certain stages to it. So even though we don't necessarily care about this character, we're going to have to deal with them. So like I say, it's in a tough position. So I'm not necessarily saying he's the star of the show. He's certainly not, but thankfully he's not on the screen a lot here. And the one thing I have to point out is that this is so bad. There's a lot of the blue lights. There's like the big green light, in the background, some weird camera angles and stuff. This is very low budget, campy kind of stuff here too. But I wanted to kind of pivot here a little bit because it's obvious, like I told you, that he's not a sissy boy, but he understands and I think is very in tune with his soft side because he's mastered the social skills of selectively flirting with women, because here he kind of has that shucks vibe, and there's this nice little back and forth between him and the lady that happens to be extremely beautiful, smart, well-mannered, and of course without any sort of boyfriend at night. And of course he's struggling with not wanting to feed on her while he's holding her, and they delay the kiss. I'm like, you know what? This is probably something that as a guy we're like, yeah, get on that, hop on that, right? We haven't seen anybody run around lingerie yet ripping their shirts off and titties and all that, because it's frankly it's Canada TV. What do they know about sexuality? That being said, this is kind of erotic. They have a little sexy sex, the leftover stuff from the 80s that didn't make it into TV show or movies. But we can tell that there's two women interested in him. His master's kind of like showing up on the scene, which I think is kind of cool in this episode, because he ends up being the DJ late at night on 5:30 a.m. or 4:90 or whatever the hell it was. And he basically is like goading him into meeting him, because the whole idea here, guys, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out, is we've talked 90% of the time about the substance of the show, all the silkiness about it. The plot is basically there's this like green jade cup that like supposedly the Mayans used way back in the day to like reverse being a vampire from the Mayan perspective. If you're a follower of Joseph Campbell, the myths and all that stuff like that, basically all cultures have roughly the same stories. It's just their interpretation of how they tell them. So there's certain themes. So I guess this is the Mayan one. But I'm like, oh, great, we got a jade cup. This reminds me of like, season 3 of the Hardy Boys TV show from the 70s or something. We never see jade anymore. Except for the David whatever movie, but I'm digressing. To get back on point, Pixel, I'd like to point out that we're halfway through the episode of episode 1 so far. And I have to say this, for mid-level TV, it's moving fairly quickly. There's no obvious speed ups or slowdowns. There's not a tremendous amount of relying on, say, action or violence or gore. They're giving equal time to relationship building, to the characters, introducing them, to give them the situations where the stupid plot about stealing blood may or may not be relevant to him and all that. But I don't think they're doing a bad job of it so far. I mean, we're getting towards the last act, actually the first one, where it's going to be obvious that, oh, wait a minute, there's definitely going to be part 2, but not before we get him being confronted by the medical examiner in his apartment, kind of being a whiny ass bitch about not wanting to feed on animals and everything else there too. So we can just get, in case we weren't sure, we could feel just how strongly this guy feels about how tough his situation is, because damn it, he just can't be an erotic vampire going out kicking ass, taking names and slaying. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know, because, and I do like the chemistry between him and the medical, not the medical examiner, the coroner. But no, that whole scene, he's feeling like upset at that moment, like, oh no, I almost did it. I almost gave in to my urges. I can't. What a little blood. But here's where I have to go ahead and express my disappointment a little bit, because he's worried that maybe it could be his old master that's behind all of this. And we aren't introduced to him in the present for a good bit until we get him over the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so excited, like, oh my God, is he going to be taunting him through the radio for like through half of this season? That sounds fantastic. Because you're right. This guy isn't very physically impressive. Lucien LaCroix. He's not physically impressive, but it's all in the performance. And so
Exactly. He has to be 100% on, because I'm not saying he's a little guy, because I really don't know, but just the way the face looks, he's got that 90s, I'll beat all you guys up kind of look. Like if 20 emo guys came at you, unless they had knives or something like that, you're not afraid, just because of how just their face looks. They look sickly, right? And they do a good job of that, because this show already has a lot of like side camera angles with lots of close-ins with either the blue light in the background or the green, or in this case the yellow. There's definitely, it seems like, a color emotive going on with you. You've got that blue light in the foreground, in the background you've got the green light. You see it in the bar, you see it here, but for him, for some reason, they give him the sickly yellow, maybe to emphasize the fact that he is the master, the guy that in episode 2 would talk a little bit about, I taught Nero how to play while Roma burned, and all that bullshit speech we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But I'm like, it's not bad. It's just he has to be on as much as Nick Knight has to.
Yes. And for the most part, he does. You totally believe that he's able to just pull people in and adjust them to his way of life. After that, though, after we get the taunting over the radio, Um, I'm pretty sure then that's when Nick checks out. Are totally not a vampire club.
You know, this was my favorite scene of this. I really liked it a
Really?
lot. It's very atmospheric. She's got a horrible kind of sexy French accent. It's camp to a level, and I thought, God, I want to reenact this scene because it's just tremendous. I have no idea what they're really talking about because it's the vibe is infecting me, no pun intended, more than the content of that. And this is where we talk about TV and movies particularly. They're visual mediums, so the visual has to be important. It's not like it's a radio play where the voice and delivery have more of a premium put on them. Here, you got the music in the background. I always say the best stuff happens in seedy places. Did you catch the name of this strip club? It's called The Raven.
No. What
The
was it?
Raven. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I saw that, right? But they're having this little back and forth and some flashbacks. So I thought she's got this great little kind of sexy, erotic look. And sometimes the thing with late night TV, especially 80s going into 90s, is either you got the full on, we're going to dive into showing you frontal with women and all that too, and everything, or you get this tease of like lingerie and stuff like that. USA channel here in the United States was notorious for that, and I think some other TV shows were like it. And not that I'm making fun of Canada when I say this, but they have probably a different standards and practices than American television. So what they can and can't do, and also just what they find is probably a little different, right? I mean, different companies have different views on sexuality, how to express it here. But the one thing here is they're going back and forth. I'm like, oh, here's another one too, because she's the vampire chick that is shown in the middle. So obviously they have an 800-year-old mystery along with LaCroix. And I thought she looks a lot better like this, vamping it up. And like I say, that's so hard to kind of not start laughing at it. But you're like, hey, this is good stuff. I just got my popcorn. I'm eating it. It's entertaining so far. There's very little go away heat. It's very atmospheric too, especially when it walks out. And the music, I'm telling you, I just think is very moody. It's appropriate. It's there. It doesn't overtake it. It's not subdued. It's significant, and it feels very gothy. And we talk about it. It's like it's a vibe, right? There was a very famous singer that only put out a few albums in the 80s and 90s, and I'm bringing this up to tie in for our older audience here. Very popular around the world. If she were put on an album today, she'd sell 10 million copies easily, and her name is Sade. And she has a very exotic background. She has a very smooth, husky, kind of like jazzy-ish kind of voice. But somebody described her early on as, well, she's a vibe. You can't say she's adult contemporary. You can't say she's modern pop or whatever like that. It's just something about her. She's got this dreamy-like quality. This show, for this first episode, has done a very solid job of convincing you all the way through. Now, here on Extreme Movie Show, we all, including RDV from the Great Midwest, the 30-year-old something guy that does the different generations stuff here with us, we've reviewed season 1 of Haven, which is based off of Stephen King's story, and it was kind of a modern-day setup, which is kind of interesting, a little different. Doesn't have a campy vibe at all, but we definitely are getting it here at this point. But there's definitely some information about it's not him that has it. You need to find out who's really got it. So we don't know what the fuck is going on with this Jade Cup other than what it does. And a couple chicks have the hot for him. Now we've got a third one in here. And he's having to, because he's a very progressive vampire. He's not interested in killing. He's interested in trying to just come to grips with his own feelings and the feelings of everybody else around him. And that's what we get. And meanwhile, the chick that's hot for him, the detective chick, or the detective, the museum chick, she's of course following. Sort of like, wait a minute, is she what she seems to be? We don't know. So yeah, I really did like the scene. I like the vibe at all. I like it when you have two people talking at a bar and you hear glasses clinking, music playing, strippers in the background, or dancers in lingerie, people sitting around muttering to himself. That never gets old in any TV or movie if it's done right. It's a great way to pretty much end the episode to me. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it was a solid ending. And then when it led to episode 2, it was definitely it was the confrontation that we always wanted. But no, it was very very intriguing with how LaCroix could go ahead and just command the room with Nick in it. I made you this.
There is an art to the way you speak, and he does a good job with it. So we go, hey, this guy's not a bitch, right? And so basically, since we're covering both episodes and it's a run on, and we've got about 5-6 minutes left here before we go live, 7 o'clock, to discuss a Korean movie with RDV called I'm going to call it The Child, because frankly, I don't know how to pronounce it, and we'll get to that in a minute. we're going to just continue on. And I will say that episode 2, I had mentioned to you before that his partner, who he finds out is probably Polish because he likes polka music, basically has a confrontation with LaCroix. Did you see how he slaughtered the pig there? And he goads him because he's like, what did you do for me? You're going to have to choose between her or the cup. Either way, I win. So yeah, he's taunting him, goading him, which is great because that never gets old when you're taunting somebody, especially somebody that's, soft and, like Nick Knight or whatever. Not a pussy, not a sissy boy, but sensitive. I like it when sensitive people get bullied a little bit. And he's getting it from his master because, frankly, his master's got a point. So basically, I just thought, okay, he goes to jump up and save it in really horrible special effects. No CGI, but really bad. He kind of gets her saved, but in the process, and this popped me hard because basically a third of the second episode is really all about his partner who's driving his really old car that has a great trunk space, which has been made note of several times. And the fact is somebody had cut his brake line. We don't know who. We still don't know what the hell is going on other than people are dying. Everybody's wrong. And Nick Knight basically, I was laughing so hard. This scene alone will make you want to watch both episodes. It's where after him and LaCroix have their little confrontation, dust up, and he saves the girl. And he's like, run. And he's got the really horrible makeup and fangs and eye contact stuff. Is when he leaves the building on the seedier side of town and the sun is coming up and his jacket is just poofing out all this damn smoke on this back lot, and he stumbles into the trunk in his car and has to stay there because the sun's coming up. And then they find the car, they impound it, his partner gets it, drives around, decides to go chase a clue down, has a run-in with people, and I'm like, this is tremendous. This is how you elevate your partner, guy, which is why I said he didn't bother me after these 2 episodes. The first one, yes, maybe a little bit. And then here he finally kind of comes to, and he doesn't really know about it. And he's like, I'm sorry about your car. He's like, I could kill you for the car. But because he's such a swell guy, this Nick Knight, he goes, but I owe you an apology on the case. You were right. Typo. So we get that 2-second exposition dump about how he pieces everything together. And we do get a little bit of a previously on Forever Night, minus the saying of it, where we get kind of caught up and they find out it's some schlub dude that like lost his wife or something like that. That's a doctor, and he's a dweeb. He's a nobody. It was a great red herring the whole time, right? I thought this was a nice way to kind of tie up the loose end. What about you?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask what you thought about the blood draining villain of the day, which wasn't a vampire.
I did not mind it. We assumed it was going to be something nefarious, right? No, it was a human that did it.
Yeah.
But you said there's something about this that you kind of didn't like how it ended. I want you to kind of explain that because obviously it's a TV movie done in 2 parts here, redoing it. They're setting it up for the rest of the season, but something here didn't sit well with you. What was that?
So after the go ahead, because the doctor goes to actually, isn't it Nick's apartment, like his area, because Jeannie is brought there by Dr. Hunter, Alice. And after the doctor basically gets his just desserts and fire is going all across the apartment, LaCroix goes ahead and reveals himself. And he's saying, no, Nick, go ahead. You want to fight me? Go. Take a bite of Dr. Hunter. And she looks over at him and she's like, yes, bite me, please. Do it. Feed. Come on. Why are you waiting? You need to do it, Nick. And he's about to, but he's like, no. And he's like trying to keep her aside. But LaCroix gets the better of him, knocks him down, and so he takes a bite of Alice. But
you mean you didn't like it when LaCroix was like, yield to your thirst, and they're having these flashbacks from before with the fire going on in the background? This is tremendous television.
I love that. Here's the problem, though. He kills him because LaCroix went ahead and threw this chunk of wood with fire at the edge of it. And well, I can't die on metal spokes. So what does Nick do? He takes that piece of wood. It's already flaming, and he just tosses it into LaCroix, and he dies. And that's the sad part. He shouldn't have died. He should have stuck around.
You think he's dead?
It does appear like he's dead to me. It does seem that way.
I'll just close with this. I've often mentioned to a lot of people that I think Richard Gere is an incredible actor, and I think American Gigolo is a phenomenal performance. And he was one of the first actors that would talk in this kind of voice here, the late night voice. And I like how Nick Knight goes from "damn it, I'm upset" to "no, I'm just distraught with my emotions" to "I'm going to close off with sounding something like this, like I'm 800 years old." I love it because he kind of does it here at the end, and they kind of whatever. I don't believe that LaCroix is dead because, frankly, he got put on that smoke, or when they had their dust up, and then he comes back. He's just going to keep taunting him, and even if he is dead in the real time storyline, he's going to be coming back doing it. But I found LaCroix struggle to be like, a young virgin male trying to navigate his way through like middle school and high school and all that too, with just trying to have to take everybody's feelings into account, trying to decide what he wants. And it sounds kind of hokey and campy, and that's what it is. And I've said before at the beginning, and I'll say it here as we wrap up here, episodes 1 and 2, season 1 of Forever Night, is that it's a mid-level show. It's not meant for hardcore prime time. It's solid enough where I think they've done everything that works. I don't think there's anything that's completely go-away heat. If this is the kind of thing that you're interested in, where you want some atmosphere, it's a great show. It's one of the shows that I would say, again, watch later at night, or like in the fall and the winter when you're feeling kind of moody, because if you're in there, it works. And even though there's a lot of shows that come and go, shows like this, or like Highlander in the 90s that were like mid-level shows and just kind of spin-offs, they lasted for a while because they were popular as the market for it. You even saw kind of a slight resurgence, say, science fiction shows like I mentioned before you popped on today, like the X-Files, and they're turning a more serious one with the Millennium and stuff. But this is not bad television.
No,
it's not the greatest. Definitely could be worse. It's entertaining enough. I think by these 2 episodes, we don't know exactly how the rest of the season here is going to go, and that's why we chose to review it here on the Extreme Movie Show. Final thoughts?
My final thoughts are it's definitely a solid trip. It's going to be interesting to see how they go now that we're past the finale, the premiere point. Once we get into a little bit, it's going to get kind of like a Monster of the Week vibe, I'm pretty sure. But I'm hoping that it'll stay entertaining.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I think one of the things I was going to ask you guys, and when we go to do our review here later, I'll talk to RDV, but I think Tomb of Dracula had a sensitive detective or something, or whatever is what I've heard when I was reading up on this character. Because even though Angel was a spinoff from Buffy, we've talked about Buffy, but the movie was first, and then they did the TV show, I think mid to later 90s. This is obviously 92, 93-ish, so could argue that this is kind of first to set the tone for how well that could be done, because obviously vampires noticeably changed in the 90s, and they would change in the late 90s too, and we'll talk more about that as things progress here on the Extreme Movie Show. I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Anthony Maranya, Comic Book Frog, everybody, especially the new people on Twitter that are reaching out that said, yeah, I really love Forever Night. We're going to continue doing episode by episode of season 1 of this until we're done with that, before we do it in a James Bond review, move on to something else. Those of you sticking around, we're going to be hopping on to the other stream talking about a Korean action movie called The Child with RDV and I from the Great Midwest. So for Professor Pixel, everybody here, have a good night. As always, stay extreme.
Good night now.
Good night now.
Not a dang